And now it's time for the message. So please welcome Reverend Cathy.
Thank you. Beautiful song. Thank you so much. Before I begin, I need to remind everybody that we do have our last Sunday of our food drive happening today. So tomorrow I will be delivering that nice big basket of food and all the money that's collected. And last week we collected $234. Yeah, thank you. So I'm sure we're going to do well this week as well. And I'm really grateful that we were able to participate in the Centers for Spiritual Living World Day of Service in this way. So, 18 years ago this week, the trajectories of our lives changed forever. And I know that in some way each of us stopped this week to remember the horror and the terror we felt as we bore witness to our vulnerability as a nation. And I'm hoping that we also remember that outpouring, incredible outpouring of compassion, unity, and strength that flowed from the hearts of our citizens. And we might ask ourselves in this remembrance, why can't it always be this way? Why does it take a tragedy to bring forth this compassion? I don't know why, but it's always gratifying. I'm seeing this same thing happen with the Bahamas. I'm getting all kinds of letters soliciting help for the Bahamas, and hey, it's a wonderful thing. We've been talking this month about ensuring the stewardship of our planet. And those of you who were here last week know that Rabbi Rachel agreed with what we had talked about the week before, and that was that basically healing this planet is an inside job. We have to start with ourselves first. And in his weekly video, our leader, our spiritual leader for Centers for Spiritual Living, Dr. Ken Gordon, emphasized that when we live in fear and anger, we're contributing to the pollution of our world. We're polluting our atmosphere every time we send out an angry thought or a fearful thought. And he said, you know, there's nothing out there that needs to be fixed, but there's something in here that needs to get a bigger idea. And I think that bigger idea is that we can never create or heal anything with the same energy that created it. Hate breeds more hate, and anger breeds more anger. So, Adam mentioned our many teachers, and one of my teachers that I've been paying a lot of attention to lately is Brene Brown. And I think some of you are familiar with her work. She wrote Rising Strong and Daring Greatly. And her latest book is called Braving the Wilderness. And in it, she studies what constitutes true belonging versus, quote unquote, fitting in. And her interest stemmed from her own feelings of never belonging in the world. And she lived in a transshipment family, they moved a lot, and she never quite felt that she belonged anywhere. And then her interest was stimulated by an interview that was conducted by Bill Moyers and featured Maya Angelou. And this happened many years ago. But Brene heard Maya suggest that you can only feel truly free when you realize that you belong no place, and yet you belong any place. She said that the realization of this causes you to pay a high price, but it also gives you great reward. And later on in the interview, when Bill Moyers asked her another question, she said, well, in truth, I belong to Maya, and I like Maya very much. These statements intrigued and puzzled and even a little bit angered Brene Brown, because she really didn't know, in her words, what the hell Maya was talking about. This led her to the study this concept of belonging, and to her developing understanding that true belonging is really something we carry in our hearts. It's not something we negotiate with outside groups. It's something we keep in here. And fitting in, on the other hand, asks us to identify what we need to change so that we can fit in with an outside group. We see how this concept of fitting in works in our society today, and not always to our greater good. When many of us have sorted ourselves into factions based on politics and ideologies, and have turned away from one another and turned toward rage and blame of the other. Factions, rather than bringing people together in true belonging, instead create what's called common enemy intimacy. Common enemy intimacy. It's hard to say. Common enemy intimacy. In other words, we're together as a group because we hate the same people. Factions are bred by fear and uncertainty, and they do metastasize often into hatred, unfortunately. And as we know, fear distorts reality, substitutes assumption for reason, leads to awfulizing, ain't it awful, and can paralyze us into inaction. People who are in pain will not be diverted. And sometimes this unresolved pain will surface in hatred of others and will create enemies. Brown reminds us that for many people it is easier to cause pain to others than it is to feel and own your own pain. In her research, Brene Brown identified 4 practices that led to the highest levels of sense of belonging among individuals. And I'm thinking about all these practices led her to finally understand what Maya meant when she said, I belong to Maya, and I like Maya very much. She learned that feelings of true belonging are directly correlated to feelings of self-worth. I think we all know that, but it bears remembering. And the best thing that we can do is learn to belong to ourselves, just as we are, or to love ourselves as God already loves us. So the first practice that she talked about is, I love this one, people are hard to hate close up, so we better move in. And we all know this, we all know that when we take the time to really know someone, our assumptions are often shattered. The assumptions we initially made, well, no, that wasn't true about that person. And therein lies the basis for true intimacy to be formed. So taking the time to learn about other cultures and other beliefs and other practices without judgment promotes feelings of belonging. One of my colleagues recently told this story that so beautifully brings home the beauty of this practice. And this was, she said, when my daughter was very small, I think she was 4 years old, she said to me, black, white, red, yellow, brown, what difference does it make? When you take off the skin, we all look the same. She had no idea, this little girl, that she was being profoundly metaphysical. But she was, because we know God created all that is out of its own substance. And boy, what difference does it make? It makes a lot of difference in the external world, in colors and shapes and sizes and talents and abilities and perspectives and likes and dislikes. But when we take the bodies off, when we look within, the essence, the beingness of all people is the same because it's God essence. This is what we're all made of. We're all an amazing collection of God's soup bowls. Each one unique, but each filled with the same divine substance. So if we emptied all our bowls into one big pot, let's call that pot race consciousness, we couldn't tell where one of us ended and the next began. There could be no disharmony in this God soup. How peaceful would that be if we all chose to live in that belief system? The second practice is speak truth to BS, but do it civilly. Speak truth to BS. Stand up in your truth. What a concept. We've lost our sense of civility. We're living in a world where rapid dehumanization seems to be occurring, and sometimes there's language used that pushes people out of their own humanity. How many of you watched the Democratic debates the other night? A few of you. So those of you who did, I kept falling asleep, and I'm thankful for that, to tell you the truth. But I did see an example of uncivility, if that was a word, that really made me cringe. And it was when one candidate, Julian Castro, really attacked Joe Biden and was really being mean about his memory. Don't you remember that, Joe? You just said it. Don't you remember that? And we all know that He's had some problems with memory issues, but it was really mean-spirited, and there was a palpable gasp from people in the audience. That's all. It didn't do any good for him or his candidacy. It just made people cringe and go, did you really have to say that in that way? And it made me think, if we can't even treat people of like mind, okay, there's 10 candidates up there, but they're all of like mind. They all affiliate with the Democratic Party. If we can't treat each other with civility when we're of like mind, then there is a real danger to us unraveling as a civilization. So speak truth to BS, but speak it with civility. The third practice is hold hands with strangers. Now what does that mean? I love that. But I think it really means to have a ministry of present, to be present with people who are in pain, or to connect with people who are brokenhearted. That's what creates moments that really remind us of what is possible between human beings. Catholic mystic Thomas Merton said, our job is to love others without stopping to inquire whether or not they're worthy. This is not our business, and in fact, it's nobody's business. What we are asked to do is love, and this love itself will render both ourselves and our neighbors worthy. That's a lofty statement. It's not always easy, but it's something to aspire to. Our compassionate heart is nurtured by our intent and our action. But sometimes the connection between that intent and that action gets blurred because we're caught up in the whirlwind of life, and we oftentimes miss or ignore opportunities to be compassionate, to share our compassion with others. While our hearts might be willing, our actions don't mirror our compassionate intent. What can we do? I think we just choose to stay in awareness. We keep on keeping on, knowing that giving up can never be an option. And we choose to remain aware. So I'm reading the Oprah magazine the other day while I was waiting in the doctor's office, and she asked a question, when was the last time a stranger brightened your day? And I'm only going to read a couple of them, but one lady, Mandy, said, I'm a jazz vocalist, and one night I was singing in a lounge where most of the people were either talking or on their phones. I must have had a defeated look on my face because the waiter brought me a note from a guest saying, just wanted to say that you are loved. I never found out who wrote it, but it made my day and night. And then a mother out shopping said, when my son with autism was having a hard time, crying and running away from me, a woman approached me and hugged me and said, you're doing a great job. I work with kids with special needs, and I know how difficult it is. You're doing a great job. She didn't judge me. She understood. I'll never forget that. Last but not least, when I was sitting in a Starbucks, another customer came in, and I looked up and smiled. She smiled back and said, you must have some joy because your smile lights up the room. So this is holding hands with strangers. That's what this means. You know, taking the time to take an opportunity to be compassionate and to be loving. If you don't think those little things will do something to tilt our world toward love, you're absolutely wrong. Every little action. Because it's through this conscious awareness that we lay a foundation on which the connection between our intent and our action strengthens. We start by practicing awareness, and then we let our compassionate heart expand out into the world. You might want to envision a bridge that goes between our intent and our action. The image of a bridge is always powerful. It always relates to spiritual life. Because bridges are built across great spans, and sometimes we can't even see the other side to where we're going. But we know that that bridge is secure. We seldom think about the bridge's structure. And we know that each of its parts serves a specific purpose and contributes to the safety and the integrity of the bridge. So we put one foot in front of the other. We cross the bridge, and we know that on a sturdy base, a deck is laid, cables are strung, pillars are erected, and all of the bridge's parts, when built with integrity, ensure a safe journey. So similarly, our compassionate nature is strengthened within the foundation of a consciousness where we form our intentions. By adopting a foundational consciousness built upon certain principles, our lives begin to express authentic being, to reflect who and what we truly are. So these principles are simply to cause no harm and to alleviate suffering whenever and wherever you can. And this foundational consciousness forms the base of our bridge of compassion. As we cross the bridge, we live intentionally and begin to transform not only ourselves, but also the world around us. And so we agree to step out and hold hands with strangers. The fourth practice has 3 parts: strong back, soft front, and wild heart. Having a strong back, as you can imagine, means you're able to approach the world with curiosity, with courage, with fortitude, with creativity. You might think about the willow tree, because having a strong back means that you're like a willow tree, which is a perfect metaphor for serenity and wisdom and courage and strength. Because the willow survives every storm because it's wise enough to bend into the storm's energy. And it perches courageously on the edge of the water, knowing that its source of strength is there. We can be a spiritual willow and be content. The willow stands alone. The willow belongs to itself. They're independent creatures. Having a soft front means that we approach the world with authenticity and generosity and vulnerability. And we agree to assume the best about people. We might call having a soft front having a namaste consciousness, because we're agreeing to seek and find the divinity in everybody. And we understand that a spiritual crisis is created when we forget that we are all inextricably connected in a divine, invisible web of life. And while this connection can never be broken, it can be easily forgotten, and has been among a lot of our people. Our job is to remember this connection, and in its remembrance, let it inform our thoughts and our words and our deeds. In the book Effective Prayer by Dr. Holmes, he states, "We are part of the matrix of the planet. It not only makes a difference in how we treat the earth physically, our state of being, our emotions have an effect on living things, all living things, including our planet, Mother Earth." While strong back promotes the consciousness of the willow tree, for soft front, I invite you to think of the aspen tree. And this vignette about the aspen tree was written by poet Mark Nepo, who's one of my favorite authors. So he tells this story. He says, "An old friend drove me into the Santa Fe National Forest so that we could walk the aspen grove. Walking among them, touching them, listening to their creak and sway, I could feel their connectedness. Above ground, aspen grow as individual trees, but below ground, they're enlivened by one interconnected set of roots. They are the most expansive growth of trees to share a common root system. This means that they are one living organism and one living community at the same time." That's that inextricable connection. He says, "About a mile into the Santa Fe Grove, my friend and I sat on a ledge and waited. Once we were quiet, we could feel the entire grove sway as one timeless aspen and 1,000 individual trees on a mountainside in New Mexico. We could almost hear them breathe in unison. I felt certain that in the paradox of the aspen tree waits the secret to our interdependence, being who we are and staying connected to everyone." As we walked back to the car, my old friend said, "There's a community already existing underground that's growing us into being." The willow stands alone, but the aspen, on the other hand, lives only in a grove. Lives only as a grove, in fact. Each tree has its own trunk and branches, just as we do. and its own identity, while at the same time it shares communal root system that supports and nurtures and protects the entire globe. Food for thought. When we have a soft front, we remember our connections. We stop to question our judgments and our assumptions, and we understand that we can hold ideas that are completely competing. We can hold those ideas and still respect each other. When we feel disconnected or in conflict, we can stop and ask ourselves, what's the story I've been telling myself about this situation? We can choose to deepen our communication with others by clarifying with them when we feel that there's been a misunderstanding or feelings have been hurt. So Brene Brown tells a simple story about this. When one night she simply said to her husband, actually it was one afternoon, she said, "My mom's coming to dinner tonight." And her husband said, "Does it have to be tonight?" She started to get angry. She started to get defensive. She started to talk about his mom. But she didn't. She stopped. And this is what she said to him. "You know, the story I'm telling myself is that you don't want to spend time with my mother." And to her credit, she refrained from adding, "And what makes you think I like to spend time with your mother?" No, she merely told her story and said, "This is the story I'm telling myself, that you don't want to spend time with my mother." And her husband, Steve, said, "Oh, that's not it at all. I have a meeting tonight. I won't be able to spend any time with your mom. I wanted to know if maybe she could come tomorrow night." Instantaneously flipped by stopping, asking yourself, what story am I telling myself, and getting some clarification. That's having a soft front. And what about that wild heart? What does that mean? That's where we contain and nurture our true sense of belonging, while abandoning our efforts to fit in. When we finally heed the advice to stop walking through the world and looking for evidence that we don't fit in, because we know we'll always find that evidence, right? Whatever eyes we're looking through, we'll find. And when we give that up, we're able to cherish our wild heart, and we're able to nurture our sense of belonging with the willingness and courage to stand alone in our truth, while we fan the sparks of our individual creativity into the flames of collective artistry and creation. How many of you remember the picture, the photograph that was published of the little girl running naked down the street with flames, one hand goes up, the flames of napalm on her body? Really?
Oh, yeah.
Come on, how many of you remember that? You'll ruin my talk if you don't remember that. But you know, this photograph emerged from the wild heart of a photographer, and it did more to end the Vietnam War than anything else. The vision of the artist touched our hearts with pain and sorrow and led to an uprising of our collective spirit. The suffering of one human being, shown via the artistry of another, led to the end of a tragic and unnecessary war. If it could be done then, it can be done now. And we all know that our artists all have wild hearts. They dare to stand up, most of them, on who and what they are. And that's something to think about. In her book, Spiritual Ecology, not her book, the book, because it was a collection, Eleanor O'Hanlon writes, "Sacredness is inherent in the very essence of life and the multiple patterns of its arising. Sacredness is the radiant expansion of the heart." I really like that. The devotion to life that rises in contemplation of the inexhaustible mystery that is unity and diversity, the one manifesting through the whole of creation. In the absence of love and belonging, we will always, without doubt, find suffering. In the presence of connection, we remember the truth of our wholeness. We're hardwired for connection, but real connection is not found in banding together to hate other groups of people. It is found through the passionate and the compassionate support of our diversity, coupled with deep respect and love for the divinity that unites us all. And we can birth and grow connection by beginning with the inside job of knowing that we belong to ourselves and to each other, and by embodying the 4 practices that promote feelings of true belonging. Moving closer, challenging BS with civility, holding hands with strangers, and through cherishing our wild hearts, wherein lies the truth of who we really are. You know, there are countless organizations that we can join to promote sustainability and work for social and environmental justice. I was watching a YouTube the other day, and the man was from a group, representing a group called the Pioneers, which I'll talk about in a minute, but he started scrolling the names of all of these organizations that work, and he had 130,000 names. And as he was scrolling these behind his talk, he goes, "We're gonna have to speed this up because I'm gonna finish my talk." There were so many organizations, and he said this is a minimum of 130,000 organizations working to promote sustainability and social justice and environmental justice. That's amazing. That's amazing. So these pioneers that he was representing, this is a group that was started in 1990 in New Mexico, and it's an innovative nonprofit organization that highlights breakthrough solutions for restoring people and planet. Pioneers.com. Check it out. It's interesting. So they act as this fertile hub of social and scientific knowledge, and they share with each other. And they're addressing the world's most pressing environmental and social challenges. This is great. We can always find places to direct our energy towards solution if that's what we want to do. And that's important. And oh yes, we can pray. Remembering, as Dr. Holmes taught us, prayer in its truest sense is not a petition, not a supplication, not a wail of despair. It is rather an alignment, a unifying process which takes place in the mind as it reaches to its divine self and to that power which is greater than human understanding. We all truly want health care, economic opportunity, clean air, clean water, safety and security. We all want these things that ensure the stewardship of our planet. And we all get discouraged sometimes because we know that our current leadership and political establishment cannot achieve these goals without a huge sea change. So in the level of effect, yes, this requires donating money and maybe making phone calls and volunteering and voting and all those actions that are important in the world of effect. But we also need to go back to the world of cause, where true change takes place. Because we know the energy of spirit is not a man with a beard that's directing events. You guys get to be punished, you Bahamians. Well, I'm going to get you. That's not what it is. It's this responsive field of love that we can access. We know that spirit always says yes, and it is also always infinitely patient. So it's going to say yes when we say we're going to fight, and it's going to say yes when we think there's a conspiracy against us, and it's going to say yes when we say we hate and distrust half the country. But it's also going to say yes when we say, gracious God, loving God, we of ourselves are just not enough. We're tired of this. We're sick and tired of being sick and tired. We need your help. We know that there's enough shelter, enough clothing, enough love, enough clean air, and enough clean water for everyone. But obviously, we don't know how to distribute it. We need the power that moves the tides to change the tides. Because we don't know how by ourselves to keep our children safe from hurricanes or from violence. We don't know how by ourselves to work together to create a green economy. We don't know how by ourselves to create the political will to ensure that everyone has affordable health care. We don't know how by ourselves to live together in love and harmony and truly respect every person. But we do know how to speak our word for good and to know that there is a mighty moving force that is ready to turn the tides when enough of us desire this and speak our word for it. From Dr. Holmes, fear and faith are identical in that the energy used in the one is the same energy used in the other, since there is but one final energy. This final energy in the universe is the energy of our thought. Fear is a positive acceptance that you shall experience that which you dislike. Faith is a positive acceptance that you shall experience that which you do like. But they are identical in their mental action. The only difference is the direction. In Spiritual Ecology, Sandra Ingerman wrote, "We must shift the focus of our energy from our heads to our hearts, where we can access this wisdom. We must call in and surrender to the power of Spirit, the divine source, the God, the Goddess, to open the doorway for true healing to occur. We must surrender to the power of love." And so we do, and so it is.